We are getting ready for the start of the meeting. We'll wait a minute or two to allow people to acclimate to the vVoter program and get ready to take the roll. Appreciate everybody tuning back in this evening as we wind things up. We don't expect to be here too late this evening, so hopefully we'll be able to get our business done and adjourn the fall town meeting. Okay, we are ready to take a roll call for the fall town meeting to establish if we have a quorum. If you could please go to your vVoter screen and vote present. We have 173 participants on Zoom, so we should have adequate numbers for to establish quorum.
It was 107. What was the roll call, Drew? 134?
We have 134 members of the town meeting having indicated that they are present this evening. The roll call is scrolling by precinct number on the vVoter platform. A sufficient quorum having been established, we will start our meeting as we always do with the Pledge of Allegiance, placing our right hand over our hearts. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. It being the last night of the fall town meeting and it being our practice and habit from time to time to start our meeting with poem, it seems appropriate that we do so tonight with the patronymic titled poem Inauguration, written to commemorate the inauguration of President-elect Biden. So proud of ourselves, a half score and 2 years ago, redemption and rebirth, history we had created, overcome by democratic enlightenment, drunks proudly bearing our sobriety pins. Look at us, free at last. Free we were not. Out there in provinces less familiar lay embedded thoughts not so generous, resentments aged to unfathomable bitterness by kin we had made strangers and now disowned. Our fashioned superiority forced on others, attitudes hung side by side with diplomas attesting to perceived merit. On a night in Brooklyn, blinded by ego, assumption-fueled fires made the permanent temporary. Entropy, disordered and vile, took its place on stage, a painful interregnum. Leftward-leaning youth, surety born of inexperience, convinced their moment was at hand, untaught by the last exercise in counting. Follow them we could not. Timid or learned, we were unsure. The unlikely telephone camera bearing witness weekly to history unchanged, evil unrepentant, the whole world enslaved to microbes that knew not the things we could see, but controlled all that we could not. Countrymen laid waste by disease, fear as uncomfortable as the mask we wore to constrain the spread. Even science, though, could not cure our divisions, just another convenient field on which to continue to fight ourselves, as if biology and politics were both scored like a hockey game. Amidst all comes this required moment, our tribune, aged and imperfect, no stranger to pain, disappointment always close at hand, an attendant lord starting scenes, swelling an act or two, our prince today, though. The day comes, bright for some, darkness visible for others. The words of address toiled over late at night by boys who always had their hands raised. Allusions, literary and historical, exhortations, brave and hopeful. So much in so little time. Volume louder than is called for, as if hoping harder will make it true. The Beatles lyric over and over. Abbey Road meet Pennsylvania Avenue, Main Street, pay heed. We need not wait for the words themselves. The sentiment does not escape us. Tomorrow, though, tomorrow we yearn for silence, for industry uninterrupted, a quietude earned. Defeat acknowledged, but heads unbowed, we take on again all the history that may never be defeated. Hopes unfulfilled, promises unkept, scarred but still standing. Rights that remain inalienable, neighbors that remain equal, and somewhere out there in the backyard, a happiness yearning for pursuit. That ends the poetry portion of the evening. And so this brings us to Article 18, which we voted for during our last session. The town controller raised a point of order, which was that the allocation of free cash under motion number 2 under Article 18 as voted by the meeting did not specify which of the projects the free cash was being expended for, and accordingly we would ask that the meeting revote on motion number 2 as restated by the chair to make explicit from which of the allocations the free cash will be expended. And accordingly, on page 23 of the fall motion meeting booklet, under Article 18, motion number 2, as restated by the chair this evening, it's moved and seconded that $785,000 be appropriated, of which $50,906 is from free cash and $734,094 is from the Capital Stabilization Fund established under Chapter 69 of the Acts of 2002 for the following projects. 1, flood mitigation project 10, Morocco Culvert, final engineering permitting, $410,000, of which $50,906 is from free cash. The balance of the line items 2 through 6 are as set forth in the motion as printed on page 23 of the fall motion meeting booklet. And accordingly, it's moved and seconded that motion number 2 be approved as restated. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. 2/3 vote required. V-voter balloting will be open for 30 seconds. $145 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. The motion passes and the 2/3 threshold is met. Article 19 having been passed in accordance with the consent agenda, this brings us to Article 20. Article 20 put forth by the Capital Planning Committee in Article 20, which appears on page 25 of the fall town meeting Motion booklet, it's moved and seconded that $6,050,000 be appropriated for the construction of improvements to address deficiencies at the North Reservoir Dam, Gatehouse, and low-level outlet and related facilities. And the motion reads as otherwise set forth with particularity on page 25 of the fall motion booklet. The motion having been moved and seconded, presentation by its proponents, by the capital planning member, Roger McPeak, and the outside consultants and advisors.
Good evening. I thought I'd start us off on a nice, calm slide. Here we see the fall colors and the North Reservoir and the dam, the reflections in the water. You can almost hear the loons calling in the background. But this being 2020, nothing's quite so nice and calm. This evening, we're requesting $6,050,000 for repair of the North Reservoir Dam. Now, if you're like me, the first thing you're saying is like, wow, how did we get there? And I'll get to that in a moment. But there are a couple of points that need to be made related to this dam, and that is that the town of Winchester owns this dam and we are responsible for it. It's a high hazard dam that during its biennial review was downgraded to poor condition. So if we're going to keep using the North Reservoir, we're obligated to make repairs to this dam. So how did we get here? When we started out, we thought that our big problem was the low level outlet of the dam, of the reservoir, which is basically the bathtub drain of the reservoir. It allows us to drain it completely. We still have to do that work. Unfortunately, and we have other work that has to be done that was included upfront, erosion around the dam and trees that need to be removed from the backside of the dam. Unfortunately, as the engineers went through more and more of the process of looking at the dam and looking at the reports, seepage became the major problem of the dam. Now, what is seepage? If we take a look at a cross-section of this dam, it's exactly what it sort of sounds like, as water from the water side over here makes its way through the dam. It comes out the other side, and that's seepage. The problem with seepage is the amount of seepage that we have, and also as the water makes its way through the center of the dam, it picks up soil and sediments from inside the dam and carries them away. And over a long term, that creates a problem. So unfortunately, to solve this seepage problem, we have to do a large amount of excavation on the backside of the dam. So the first thing that we have to do is lower the water level inside the reservoir as far as we can, and then shave off a significant portion of the backside of the dam. Now, that material is unknown, so we're going to have to dispose of it. The qualities of the material are unknown, so we're going to have to dispose of it. We can't reuse it, and that's expensive. Then we're going to have to install what is essentially similar to a very large industrial coffee filter on the backside of this dam, only instead of a coffee filter that keeps coffee grounds on the inside of the filter basket, our filter will keep the soil and sediment that's coming from the inside of the dam inside the dam. So we'll install this filter, which is sand and gravels and industrial grade filter sheeting. And then we have to rebuild up the backside of the dam. So we now have to bring in new material to reconstruct the backside of the dam. The other unfortunate aspect of it is we have to rebuild the backside of the dam to modern standards. And currently, the backside of the dam is fairly steep compared to what we have to do. So we have to bring in much more material than what we took out to begin with. So what will we do until we can get going on this project? As we have for the last year and a half, we'll continue sending engineers to monitor the condition of the dam to make sure that it's safe. We've lowered the operating level of the reservoir to relieve pressure from the dam, and we'll continue to seek outside funding assistance, although we've been told that there's very limited chance of that actually occurring. I wish there was better news, but it is the reality. We're going to need to make these repairs. I thought I would leave you this evening on a picture 100 years ago when the dam was in much nicer condition and much prettier and much calmer. If there is an upside to this repair. I'm told that it is a once-in-a-lifetime repair. Unfortunately, it's occurring during our lifetime, and we need to make this repair. I hope you'll support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. McPeak. May we have a recommendation from the Select Board? We seem to have excluded the Select Board from our panelists. There's Mr. Betancourt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Select Board recommends favorable action unanimously.
Thank you very much. May we have a recommendation from the Finance Committee, Mr. Roscinato?
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee also voted favorable action unanimously on this article.
Thank you very much. This brings us to debate on Article 20 as presented by the Capital Planning Committee and endorsed by the Select Board and the Finance Committee. Seeing no requests for participation in debate, there we go. Further on the motion, Mr. Wilson, Roger Wilson. Mr. Wilson.
Okay, sorry, mute problem there.
No problem.
My question is the mention of if we don't do this, we can no longer use the dam. And I'm wondering if anybody in the course of looking at this compared the cost of purchasing our water versus producing it in our reservoir operation.
The town meeting member question to the Capital Planning Committee is whether or not we could otherwise source our water supply if we were to forego the repairs to the Northwest Reservoir Dam. In response to town meeting member's question, Mr. McPeak.
Well, I think one of the things that you'd have to look at is what the overall impact on the water system would be. I'm not certain that the water system as is currently configured, and we could have DPW address this, functions adequately if we remove the North Reservoir. The other thing to remember is that North Reservoir saves us a lot of money because during years of plenty, we're able to take water from the MWRA Spot Pond Reservoir when they have an overflow, and that's just free money to us. It flows over from Spot Pond and it fills our reservoirs, and we bank that, and we have free water from that. So we haven't looked at it specifically of just like completely switching off of the town reservoir system and using just MWRA money, but or MWRA water, but that's going to be a pricey proposition, I can tell you.
Thank you very much. Further in the question, Janice Jens.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Janice Jens with Precinct 4. Couple questions. Main one being, do we have any flexibility on the timing at this point? It looks like it's fairly critical, but it would be nice to know that. We're certainly approving a lot of major expenses. So if there's any room to delay this, that would be helpful to know. And also, I'm kind of want to get a sense of what our total debt is that we have in the town right now, and just how we might get a sense of prioritization that the boards might recommend for all of these projects that we're looking at. Hope that's not too many questions. Thank you.
Town meeting member, two questions, Mr. McPeak, on the issue of whether or not the project itself could be delayed, and then we'll ask Ms. Ward to address the debt level question. Mr. McPeak.
I would like to defer the question to the town engineer. I believe she's probably better to speak about the requirements of the Commonwealth of us needing to proceed sooner rather than later.
Certainly. And so the town engineer, in response to the timing on this project, Beth Rudolph, our town engineer. Ms. Rudolph.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. So since the dam has been downgraded to poor, as Mr. McPeak mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, we are now under what amounts to a consent order from the Office of Dam Safety to remedy these structural deficiencies with the dam. So we have I can't recall the exact timeline, but the work needs to be done in the near term. And the intention at this point is to have the project through design. We've already have the design funding, and we're nearing completion of the design and permitting. And this money would be for the construction, which would happen next spring, which would bring us in line with the, as I said, the consent order that we have from the Office of Dam Safety. And just if I could go back to the previous person's question, we have looked at the possibility of shutting down the North Reservoir. There's a couple issues. Number one, it's a natural depression where water flows into. So even if we were to kind of fill it, which would cost, millions of dollars to bring soil in and fill it, there's still water that would come in that area, and the dam would still have to be secured as water would naturally kind of pond in that area. And in terms of cost, there is a significant cost savings over the term to have the dam repaired as opposed to going to the MDBRA and buying water, the same amount of water from the MDBRA. So I think it's on the order of 5 to 10 years of a payback for this $6 million project as opposed to purchasing MDBRA water. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rudolph. Ms. Ward, the town controller, with respect to the current status of the town's debt level.
Hi, good evening. Yes, as of June 30th, the latest and greatest balances that we have for the debt service, the outstanding debt is $142 million.
And Stacy, could you give us some perspective on $142 million as it relates to our the size of our budget, whether or not on a historical basis or otherwise in accordance with any good governance metrics, how that what that looks like?
Well, according to our total budget for FY21, which is 132 million-ish, it's a bit more than the budget, but it has been the case with the town is we have a lot of debt that's covered by dedicated revenue sources, which is a great policy for the town to have. We've usually have done debt exclusions for the big projects, and we also have the building and capital stabilization funds, which are dedicated to pay some of the debt service. So what we have for general debt, which is just paid within our Prop 2.5, is a very limited amount compared to the overall outstanding debt. With that said, this is a water sewer project, which is tied to the tax rate at 86.45%. So there is a dedicated revenue source to pay for this debt service as part of the tax rate. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but hopefully it is.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful. Further on the question, Mercedes Calabi, I'm not sure, Ms. Calabi, whether you dropped off of our list or not.
Thank you. My question was answered by town engineer. It had to do with safety, Quabbin, and simply taking North Reservoir off the line. So it was covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further on the question, Anthony Conti.
Still unclear as to whether the payment of this $6 million appropriation will come out of the water and sewer account totally, which presumably would mean that we're facing an increase in the water and sewer rates, or whether it would actually come out of property tax revenues, in which case I'm wondering whether that would require an override.
Ms. Ward, in response to the town meeting member's question as to what the source of these debt service payments will be, the town meeting member trying to clarify whether it will be from water and sewer revenue collected by the residents or from the general fund revenues of the town.
It's a combination legislation that passed many years ago, Chapter 110 of the Acts of, I'm not quite sure what year it was. It basically is a debt exclusion. Every time we issue debt related to water and sewer, we do allow to grow the tax levy above and beyond the Prop 2.5. So it's basically treated like a debt exclusion for 86.45% of the debt service. So the other piece of it would be raised through the water rates, will be paid through the water rates.
And will that require excuse me, Mr. Moderator, if I could elaborate?
Certainly, Mr. Conti with a follow-up.
Will that require an increase in the water and sewer rate?
I believe this project was already factored into the water and sewer rate calculations that were done recently as part of the last town meeting when they were raised. So the water rates, I don't believe will be raised further to account for this project. I believe it's already included, but the taxes will go up for the share of the debt service.
And Mr. McPeak, to confirm that these amounts are already included in the projected water and sewer rates.
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. McPeak. Further on the question, Heather Mango.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, Heather Mango, Precinct 3. I just have a question on clarification of who actually owns the ownership of the dam. Isn't it the MWRA? Do they maintain and control it? And if so, do they play a role in assisting with any of this? And then just one other question is, aren't multiple towns utilizing this water supply, or is it just Winchester?
So Winchester is a little bit unique in this circumstance, as in all others. About half of the town's water does come from the MWRA, but about another half of it or so comes from our own reservoirs, which we control. And so those water sources are not shared outside the community, and they lie solely within the control of the town and its agencies. So those are our own water source. And as Mr. McPeak indicated earlier, while they do require upkeep and maintenance, they also provide us with a fair amount of flexibility and some relief from the pains of the MWRA.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
And further in the question, Kui Min.
Yeah, so Min Q is from Precinct 8. My question is like for this big amount of money, do we consider how to monetization of the fund? So the increase of the tax and the water rate will not be just put on the next year or two or something. So I want to have an idea how long will this increase for the amount, the period of time for how to cover those big amount of money.
Thank you very much. Ms. Q, in response to the town meeting member's question about the amortization of this $6 million, the length and duration of the bond and over what period of time it will be paid. Ms. Ward, perhaps?
I'm not certain what was analyzed in the water and sewer prep work, but I believe this type of project can be amortized over 30 years. Whether or not we will do it over 30 years, and I don't know if Sheila Tracy's on the line or if maybe someone from the Capitol could confirm that. But the rates in the debt service structure can certainly be established based on what we think is best for the town, whether it's over 30 years, 20 years, 25 years, level principal, level debt service. There's all sorts of combinations we could do. But I'm not entirely sure what was established in the estimates at this point.
So we'll just ask some clarification, perhaps first from the town treasurer, Sheila Tracy. Ms. Tracy? You're on mute there, Sheila. Ms. Tracy?
Yes, I was not involved in the estimate, so I don't know what was included in the estimates for the Water Enterprise Fund. But to answer the question on the length of time, typically we're allowed up to 30 years, I believe. I don't have it in front of me, but for a water project, typically we try not to go the full 30 years. We usually try to do 25 years. And we look at the market rates at the time. We look at whether we should have a level debt service for the level principal service. So there's a lot of things that go into it. So typically we've done those projects for about 25 years.
Thank you very much. Mr. McPeak, any further response to the town meeting member's question? I don't know whether or not your committee gave any estimates with any more acuity as to the length of the debt service.
I don't want to get out of my lane too far. This is ultimately a question and a choice of the select board. They'll be presented with all the options and they will make the ultimate decision based on the interest rates for the time period and the extent that they can go. Dams in particular, I can tell you, I've been told have a particular option that you can go out to 40 years. But I will say that I've seen some of the amortization tables for this, and because money is so cheap right now, we start paying more money when we get out to the longer rates. So we would probably pull it in closer than 40 years for sure.
Thank you very much. Ms. Q, I think in response to your question, it seems evident that there'll be no short-term gross expenditure of the $6 million, and it will be amortized over a long period of time, likely in excess of 15 to 20 years. Further in the question, Carol Savage. Ms. Savage.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to, I'm not sure if the select board or proponent, I'm in favor of this motion. It seems like an urgent and important project for the town. I would ask, we did approve increases to the water and sewer rates in the last town meeting, and they were significant. And it was to enhance the reserve fund, and I guess to allow for these kinds of capital projects. What I would ask is that town meeting be presented a projection to answer some of the questions that folks are being asked, that look forward on where do we stand now that we have increased these rates, and if we do this project, it would, I think, be helpful to see what the projections are for receipts as well as capital and operating expenses going forward in the spring town meeting.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Mr. Bettencourt, in response to the comments of the town meeting members. Mr. Bettencourt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, through you to Ms. Savage. We have been getting a lot of feedback on the high water rates. Really, it's a kind of a confluence of events with a drought that we experienced this summer, one of the driest that we've had in a long time. And our usage in the town went up dramatically this summer. So with a 12% increase and a high usage, I think everybody's bumped up considerably, including mine. And this project in particular and our other capital projects were all factored into this rate increase and future rate increases. We will have the flexibility to maybe push off a rate increase or two based on years like this of higher revenue. But we still will need to be increasing incrementally over a period of time to fund some of these projects to get us back to where we need to be. But it's a necessary project, and we will certainly be coming back in the spring with a full report to town meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bettencourt. Nice use of confluence. Further in the question, Catherine Curtis. Ms. Curtis.
Hello, Catherine Curtis, Precinct 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. I was just wondering if someone familiar with the project could talk to public access both during and after the project when the grade is changed. I think many members are aware that it is a very popular access point to the Fells, resource that a lot of the public is very attached to. So I just wanted to know if someone could speak to that.
Further, in response to town meeting members' question about public access to the North Reservoir Dam area, I don't know, Mr. McPeak, if you're the appropriate person.
I think I would pass that to Beth. She's seen the design plans more intimately than I have.
Certainly, the town engineer, Ms. Rudolph, in response to the town meeting members' question about public access to the project once completed.
Thank you. Yeah, so certainly during construction, the access in that area will be limited, and there will not likely be through pedestrian access across the dam. In the final design, there is a plan for pedestrian access around the area, not likely to be kind of allow access to the top of the dam as we see today, but there will certainly be maintained some pedestrian access to the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rudolph. We are nearing the end of debate on Article 20 by the town meeting members. Our final question, Mr. Rome, Nathan Rome. Mr. Rome. Nathan, you're still muted there. Mr. Rome has been elevated, and if you could unmute yourself and.
All right.
That's okay.
Okay. Nathan Rome. My wife and I live in one of the 3 houses closest to the dam, and I'm wondering what can the neighbors expect in terms of noise from earth moving equipment and trucks hauling dirt out and then bringing it back months later, and how will that be? And in addition to the previous question, aside from walking, that people walk below the dam, the Reservoir Trail and the Skyline Trail, 2 major trails in the fells, pass through that area. Will they be rerouted somehow, or will people be able to walk between the Shepherd House and the dam to get to those trails?
Thank you very much, Mr. Rome. In response to town meeting member's question, perhaps Ms. Rudolph, the town engineer, the town meeting member, a neighbor of the project asked what the disruption will be like in the neighborhood during the construction period. And then as a follow-up, whether the Reservoir and Skyline trails within the fells will be preserved for access once the project is complete. Ms. Rudolph,
while it's going.
Ms. Rudolph, the town engineer.
Sure. I would actually defer this question to Tulene, who is our engineer from Weston and Sampson. I believe she's on your panelist list to talk about the construction impacts in particular.
Sure. From outside consultant, Tulene Fusilier from Weston and Sampson, the town engineers, Ms. Fusilier.
Yes, hi. Construction is estimated to take about 6 months, and one can expect earth-moving trucks, noise. Basically, it is going to be construction noise. So I think that should be expected. And then as far as the trail use, really the entrance to the trails will be closed for some time, but not the whole 6 months. There is some work to be done right at the entrance. So when that happens, the entrance to the trail will be closed, but most of the time it should remain open.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fusilier. This brings us to a vote on Article 20. Article 20 proposed by the Capital Planning Committee, endorsed by the Select Board and the Finance Committee, both recommending favorable action. A 2/3 vote is required. All those in favor of Article 20, please go to your V-Voter screen. All those in favor, please vote yes. Those opposed, please vote no. $148 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 2 in the negative, 150 members having voted, 100 votes needed for the 2/3 threshold. The affirmative votes 148, 2/3 threshold is met, and Article 20 passes. This brings us to Article 21. Article 21, which was originally on our consent agenda but was removed in accordance with our procedures, appears on page 26 and 27 of the fall town meeting motion booklet. Article 21, an article to change the purpose of the grass fields revolving fund and the synthetic fields revolving fund as set forth on page 26. Under Article 21, it's moved and seconded that the town approve Article 21 as printed in the warrant. This is a proposal by the town manager's office, and Nick Kakolfi, the recreation director, will present Article 21 on behalf of the town manager's office. Mr. Kakolfi.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's actually Amy Shapiro is going to be presenting on this one.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shapiro from the Select Board. I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you so much. And we did have a short presentation. We're able to get that up.
Okay. I'll ask Mr. Griffin to accelerate that for us.
Sure. And just to save time, I can start talking while you get that up. So the real purpose of this is, Mr. Moderator mentioned, this was originally on the consent agenda, and it was pulled out. So what this is really looking to do is to make an amendment to the current grass fields revolving fund bylaw and synthetic fields revolving fund in order to allow for the hiring of a field marshal to look after the fields, both the turf fields, the artificial fields. Thank you, Matt, as well as the grass fields in town. So Matt, if you can go to slide number 2. So the current inclusions in the bylaw for what can this fund, the revolving fund, can be used for are below. So for the grass fields revolving fund, it can currently be used for grass field maintenance, bathrooms, fencing, lights, court maintenance, playground equipment, and scoreboards. The synthetic field revolving fund is very similar, except that there are a custodial employees may be paid from this revolving fund, just so that they can they can clean the bathrooms and take care of the synthetic turf and the maintenance as well. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, so I will certainly let Nick, who's been doing an amazing job as he came into the rec department during a global pandemic, not an easy feat. I'll let him answer some questions if committee members have them after my presentation. But briefly, the field marshal position is really an integral part of moving forward with our fields, because at this point, there are many times where unpermitted groups are using our fields. And there's a couple of reasons why that's a problem. First of all, we're not capturing the revenue from those groups. And oftentimes they're fee-based field programs and should be paying the permitting fees to the recreation department to further increase the funds in the revolving funds. Secondly, you know, these groups, if they are not following the permitting process, they are not paying fees, but they're also not providing to the town the proof of liability insurance. And many times they're working with children, and we don't have any documentation of Courier-Story forms to the town. So there's a lot of liability and certainly increased revenue that could be found if we are able to have this field marshal position. In addition, the fields, you know, the DPW does an amazing job keeping our fields, you know, safe and in good condition. But sometimes things come up and there's safety issues, and the DPW, as we all know, has a million other things going on. So this field marshal position would allow to really quick communication with DPW to ensure that the fields are safe for users in real time. And then finally, just the field marshal would really be a liaison between the recreation department, the town, and the general public about field use, what needs to be done in order to use the fields in the right way, and then certainly communicate any safety concerns that they see. And the personnel board did approve the field marshal position for FY21. It's a seasonal position. The maximum during the fall and spring would be about 10 hours a week. And in the summer, it would expand to 15 hours a week, because we are seeing obviously a lot more usage of the fields in the summer, and oftentimes more unpermitted use of the fields during the summer. So the annual cost to the revolving fund would be roughly between $5,000 and $7,000 for the year. So overall, I just wanted to say that, again, I think that this is a really important position to have in town. I think it will give, not only bring in more revenue, which is certainly important, but it will also really address some safety issues and some safety concerns that both with the fields themselves, but also just making sure that we know who's using our fields, we know who's in Winchester, and that everyone is doing so in a safe way.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shapiro. May we have a recommendation from the Finance Committee, Mr. Roscinato?
Yes, Finance Committee voted favorable action on this article.
Thank you very much. Further on the motion, Chris Nixon. Mr. Nixon. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for recognizing me, and thank you, Ms. Shapiro, for the presentation. I want to be clear tonight, although I am on the school committee, I'm not speaking on behalf of the school committee. I'm really speaking as a town meeting member and as a parent in Winchester who's always interested in our fields and facilities being in top nick for our students. I want to thank, first of all, the chair of the select board, Mr. Betancourt. I want to thank Enzo as well, who took some time to speak with me about this this past week. I was really conflicted when the warrant came out on this article, even though we're not talking about a great deal of money in one sense, and another maybe we are in terms of the consequence. I wanted to offer, Mr. Moderator, that as I understood the history of the funds, they were established really for the maintenance and repair of the fields. And as several, including several folks have shared with me this week or acknowledged, these funds have really just not generated the kind of revenue that we originally expected. That may be an elephant in the room, and some former finance committee members, I think, would acknowledge that, and that's unfortunate. And I think, to Ms. Shapiro's point, if there are opportunities to claw back or find revenue for the usage of the fields, that's something that we should absolutely pursue. But I suppose fundamentally what I struggle with, and I think it's maybe best clearly stated in the background, is that it feels to me that this may be taking monies from the funds for a personnel expense, even though it's part-time. It looks like and feels like an operating expense. And my concern is that given our revenues have not been what we originally anticipated for the fields, unfortunately, it feels like we might be taking money from the penny jar. And so while it may not be a lot of money, I think it may represent a substantial percentage of the funds. My understanding from those who've audited these funds in the past on behalf of FinCom is these funds generate between maybe the low 20s into the mid $30,000. So this could be as much as a quarter or a third of the funds. I don't know if those numbers are still the case today. So my question, Mr. Moderator, through you perhaps to Ms. Shapiro or to our representatives from REC, is there an accounting to show that this expenditure that Ms. Shapiro represented to us and its associated costs, is this net positive or is it net negative? In other words, if we spend $5,000 to $7,000 to address, I think, a really legitimate need, are we expecting, in fact, to bring in revenues that exceed the expense? And if I could kindly ask, I'm not sure who would be best to answer that question. If you could come back to me, I have a follow-up question or a suggestion, and I would appreciate it.
In response to town meeting member's question, Ms. Shapiro, about whether or not this expenditure will result in a net increase in revenues to the extent that can be predicted by the proponents.
Yeah, so I can start, and then I will throw it over to Nick to talk a little bit more about the specific finances. So I think that the purpose of this bylaw is for field maintenance. So I do think that this position speaks directly to the bylaw and what its intent was. So Nick, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the specific finances first, and I'll come back and
yeah. So thank you for the question, Mr. Nixon, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I can't promise that it's going to be a net positive. On paper, I believe it will be. I just in the short work that me and Jim Sullivan, our program director, did on auditing the fields in the few times that we were able this year, we were able to capture some of the funds that weren't being paid for and some of the people that weren't being permitted. So I believe if we do have somebody in this position, it could be a net positive. But also keep in mind that the 2019 Town of Winchester Athletic Fields Master Plan shows that our fields are being severely deteriorated at a high level. In fact, the amount of field usage that we have is a lot more than what we actually need as far as field inventory. So one of the things that we've been told through the field committee and through several other field user groups is that there's quite a few considerable amount of road groups that are contributing to the wear and tear of our fields, that are deteriorating them at even a quicker pace than we we anticipated just with our permitted groups. So my feeling is if we do have this position in, not only are we going to have an increased chance of revenue, but we're also going to have a chance to diminish the excessive wear and tear on some of these rural groups that are out there consistently on times where they know that we can't police them on. When we're talking about early morning weekends, especially in the summertime, there's a lot of gaps where we don't have as many youth groups. So for having a field marshal that's able to police the fields on times where we don't have the staffing on, I believe it's going to either reduce the amount of wear and tear on these groups because they're going to go elsewhere, or they're going to decide, the gig is up and we need to, be permitted, and it will increase our revenue. So I feel like there's a gain on both ends of the ledger, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kakiolfi. Mr. Nixon, against my better judgment, I'll come back to you for your follow-up.
I appreciate that. It will be quick. I want to just quickly say I appreciate everything that our rec director just stated. It's not just about revenue, it's about not overtaxing the fields and giving them time to recover. I just go back to my primary concern, Mr. Moderator, which is if we're not certain that this measure is either net neutral or net positive, what I just come back to is I don't want town meeting to do a good thing badly. I don't want the fields to lose. And it feels to me, as important as this position and these tasks are, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's an operating expense. And so I was really on the fence, but I would respectfully move for indefinite postponement. And should that fail tonight, I would just further ask that there be some accounting perhaps next year that Rec could bring back to FinCom just to be sure that we're not upside down. If this were to come back in the spring, if in the spring we were to see a request to increase the Rec department budget, the operating budget to accomplish all of these tasks, I'd be the first to suggest town meeting should pass it. I do think it's an important task. It just feels like we're going about it sort of the wrong way. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Nixon has made a motion to table or indefinitely postpone the article. Is there a second?
Second, Heidi DeLeo.
Mr. Leo seconds Mr. Nixon's motion to indefinitely postpone the consideration of Article 21. This is a majority vote. It's debatable on the motion for indefinite postponement. Mr. Jarius.
I was going to speak on the original motion, so I have nothing to say on this.
Ms. Pryor?
Yes. I'm in favor of Mr. Nixon's indefinite postponement. Sorry, Michelle Pryor, Precinct 4. I think the going about it the wrong way is, I think, my concern as well. If the Recreation Department needs the additional hours, the additional seasonal FTE, that's the budget this ought to come out of. And the revolving fields and the revolving funds for both synthetic and grass, they have, last I remember, $50,000 or so in their coffers, and we know synthetic fields cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, $500,000 or more. So we ought to be trying to bank as much money as we can in these funds. And if that's permitting more aggressively, looking at our fee structures, policing the fields, all of those things could be net positive to revenue. But as a recreation position, it shouldn't come out of a fund that's dedicated to maintaining and at some point replacing our synthetic fields. So I'm in favor of the motion.
Mr. Leo on the motion for indefinite postponement of Article 21.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That was asking a question on the original motion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gay, Russell Gay, town meeting member on the motion for indefinite postponement of Article 21.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was just actually going to comment on the original motion.
Thank you very much. On the motion for indefinite postponement, Ms. Shapiro, I'm not sure how you draw all these plum assignments, but I do want to afford you an opportunity to speak to the motion for indefinite postponement if you would like.
I'm trying not to take it personally, but so I think one thing I did want to say is that if the indefinite postponement is really based on where the funds come from for this position, which I feel is critical to Winchester and our field, there is, in my belief, precedence for in the synthetic revolving fund, there is the overtime salaries or wages of custodial employees may be paid from the revolving fund. So I do feel like that there is precedence for this type of position being paid out of the revolving fund. And I think truthfully, from Mr. Nixon's point on I wish we could look into a magic ball and figure out what the money would be that would come in from this position. And I asked the question of Nick, and truthfully, he told me the story of one day in July where there were 7 rogue groups on the fields in Winchester. And so it's very hard because it's based on a per person rate in terms of the permitting fees. So it's very hard to guesstimate what that would be. But I do think if you take that one day in July and think about 7 rogue groups, that if we were to have their permitting fees, that would certainly bring more money into the revolving fund. So I would love to be able to vote forward on this motion tonight.
Thank you very much. On the motion for indefinite postponement comes before the town meeting. Motion to indefinitely postpone Article 21 brought by Mr. Nixon, seconded by Mr. Leo. It's a majority vote. All those in favor of indefinite postponement, which will be to end the debate of Article 21, please vote yes. All those opposed to indefinite postponement, please vote no. If you vote no, we will return to a majority vote on the main motion, Article 21, as presented. $75 members of the town meeting having voted for indefinite postponement, 68 opposed. The motion for indefinite postponement passes, and Article 21 is indefinitely postponed. Articles 22 and 23 were considered and adopted as part of the consent agenda, as was Article 24. This brings us to Article 25, which appears on page 31 of the motion booklet. Article 25 is brought by the Finance Committee. It consists of 11 motions and has been revised by the Finance Committee. It now, motion number 8 has been amended to now read, moved and seconded that the town transfer $525,000 from free cash to fiscal year 2021 Finance Committee Reserve Fund, Department 9430. And then the Finance Committee seeks to debate and bring forward this evening 2 additional motions, motion number 12 and motion number 13, which we will present at the time of their consideration. On behalf of Article 25, the proponents, the Finance Committee.
Great, thanks, Mr. Moderator. I have a couple of slides that I'd like to share just to talk through all the now 13 motions for FinCom. So as Peter mentioned, there were a couple of changes to number 8 got revised, and then we added number 12 and 13. You see their language here. Many of the motion totals went through several iterations over the last couple of weeks as we finalized the totals with all the various departments. So because of this, the motions are in a bit of haphazard order, and for this I apologize. But I think the best way to look at the articles to summarize them will be to start with they're really two separate areas. One is really around COVID-related expenses. So here you see you have motions 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12, and 13 all really have to do with changes in COVID-related assumptions for the various departments. So motion 1 was a minor expense associated with the need for temporary plumbing inspections. Motions 4 and 5 relate to increased cleaning costs for the schools. All of the expenses prior to January are actually being covered by the CARES Act funding. So This funding, this addition is really for January to June, assuming that the town would then have to pick up those costs in the next period. Motion 7, it relates to increased unemployment expenses. So some of these expenses were expected from library and recreation, some impacts that we had because of COVID, but there are also some unexpected filings that have increased our run rate. The town's going to be researching those over the coming months to check for accuracy and fraud. But in the meantime, those expenses have to be paid. So we're allocating those funds with the hope that as the appeals come through, we'll receive credits in future months. Motion 8 is more of a cautious item. Given the uncertainty of the current environment, Select Board has requested that we increase the reserve fund to allow for unexpected expenses that might fall between fall and spring town meeting. So the usual reserve fund is around 400,000, which we have rarely even come close to exceeding. And this new increase really boosts that up to 900,000. So definitely an air of caution here, but might be warranted given the so many unexpected costs coming from COVID. And 12 and 13, the new articles really were to cover increases to the Board of Health for contract tracing and other COVID-related activities. These costs are also similar to the cleaning costs. They're covered by the CARES Act for 2020, but these expenses would be the rest for 2021. So moving on, the other motions really are just miscellaneous expenses, right? So for motions 2 and 3, we have town clerk expenses associated with the early election. It covers allocations for staff, political oversight, and additional postage for absentee ballots. Motion 6 is a change to the DPW's recycling contract. It extends that contract for 1 year to 2 years and spreads what's expected to be a large cost impact over the course of 2 years versus just going and having a really big expense next year. And finally, motions 9, 10, and 11 are associated with funded debt, basically just some accounting transfers that are perfectly normal. So the total right now across all these items is 1.324 million, which is high, obviously, compared to past years. But please do remember that a large portion of that expense, the 525,000 for the reserve fund, is not really spent money, but actually just a contingency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruscianato. The chair will entertain debate and input on all motions under Article 25 on a consolidated basis. May we have a recommendation from the Select Board?
The Select Board recommends favorable action.
Thank you very much. Further on the motions brought under Article 25, Michelle Pryor. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So maybe just a note for town meeting on the reserve fund, having managed that as FinCom chair. There are some years we've spent it down, but motion number 8 is something that, as Enzo described, if the need is not there, those funds revert back at the end of the year. So any unspent reserve fund reverts back to the general fund. So that's just a placeholder and a bit of a rainy day fund. I'm totally in favor of motion 8. My question is about motion 7. Having a member of my household, as well as 2 close friends, have had their SSNs used in fraudulent unemployment claims activity over the last couple of weeks. So with 110,000 or whatever that number is for unemployment, the employer has to confirm that the person is in fact has been laid off or furloughed. So I guess I'd like to understand how we have to pay $116,000 when we don't know that these employees are no longer in our employ. And I'm not sure who needs to answer that, but if we're waiting for an appeal, but we're still paying out our share of unemployment, what's the likelihood we're going to get that back? So if someone could speak to how we can avoid that upfront outlay or how we're investigating, that would be great.
The town meeting member's question about motion number 7, the chair would note that that's a transfer to a budget line item, so it doesn't necessarily compel expenditure. But in response to the town meeting member's question about how those expenditures, if and when they should come, will be reviewed in a way that will ensure that they're being expended appropriately. Mr. Ruscianato, is that you or Ms. Ward?
I'd like to defer that to Stacy Ward, our controller.
Thank you, Ms. Ward.
Okay, well, that's a very good question, Michelle, and it's been a very painful process, as some of you might know, if you've received unemployment information and you've never filed. So just a quick rundown of what was happening since March, since the onset of COVID. The state stopped sending us notifications of claims. So from March until July, we did not know who was filing and how much they were filing for, and if our town was actually on the hook for these claims. So when we found out who all the claims related to in July and August, we started diving in, but let me tell you, there was hundreds of them. So we were able to nail down most of the town side, but there's a lot of school side claims that we're still reviewing. But since then, the state has started to send us all the information of claims as they've come through. And up front, when we find out that we're getting a claim for, let's say, an employee who still works for us, we contact the employee immediately and say, did you file a claim? Because some people do have second jobs and the claim is legitimate. And if they're a part-time employee, we are on the hook for a portion of their unemployment benefits. So some of these are legitimate, even though they're still working for us, and some of them are not legitimate, but we are working our way through the hundreds of claims that we've received. With that said, the July claims are about 40,000. The August claims are about 40,000. September, again, another 40,000. We just got October's today and it was down to 17,000. So there is a decline. However, we still have to review a bunch of claims that came in from March through June, July timeframe. Now the state pays these claims out and we are billed, and we have to pay the state the way that the process works, because we don't contribute to the unemployment the unemployment insurance, which is a 1% tax on our gross payroll, which would be $700,000 a year. We, like many other communities, contribute to the self-pay, pay-as-you-go program, where we have to pay for a share of people who are part-time and might work at other jobs. We pay a share of their unemployment. And also, this is the biggest piece that we didn't consider, are people that resign during the year and have been paid by us for the last 15 months. We are on the hook for their unemployment. So if an employee left in January, we're still on the hook for them, whether or not they separated due to being laid off or being resigning on their own. So there are a lot of claims that we just need to make sure that are reasonable, valid, and legitimate, and we're working our way through those. But in the meantime, we still get these bills from the state and have to pay them. Hopefully we won't need this 116,000 and we only need maybe half of it, but at this point in time, we won't know. And if we wait until the next town meeting to verify what all our claims are, net of all the credits, we would be on the hook to pay the state and we'd be paying them late. So that's sort of hopefully a good explanation on where we're at with the claims. We're still reviewing the hundreds of claims that came in that we weren't aware of until, we knew claims were coming in, but we had no way of knowing what they were until the unemployment office released their information.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ward. Yes, thank you, Ms. Ward. Further on the question, Janice Jens. Ms. Jens.
Yes, Janice Jens, Precinct 4. Thank you for recognizing me. And thank you for explaining the expenses and dividing them into COVID and non-COVID. It certainly jogged my thinking, particularly seeing how big a number the COVID number is. If you've taken into account or thought about the impact of the vaccine, would we be bearing the cost of distributing that? Could there be additional costs or perhaps reduced costs if there's less contact tracing as people are not getting ill as frequently? So the bottom line question of that is, are there likely to be any financial potential surprises, positive or negative, in the COVID arena, particularly with respect to the vaccine?
The town meeting member's question to the proponents, whether or not any vaccine will have a financial impact on the town to the extent the committee has reviewed that issue. Mr. Ruscianato.
Sure. Yeah. I think we looked at all of these expenses, and that's part of the reason why we're increasing the amount of the reserve fund, is because there's a lot of things that we don't know coming into 2021. You don't know how long the schools are going to stay open. You don't know what the unemployment situation might be. You don't know, as you said, around the cure and how that could affect things. So a lot of these expenses, definitely, I think we estimated to the cautious side. But there were several that we tried to be optimistic as well and just put more money into the reserve fund in case those went in the wrong direction. So all of those different contingencies were discussed, but at the end of the day, we don't know which ones would ultimately occur or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruscianato. Further on the question, Helen Filio. Helen.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes.
could somebody please share with town meeting the amount of free cash we've been utilizing in this particular town meeting? Seemed I hear a lot of free cash, and I'm just wondering what the total is.
The town meeting members' question as to whether or not we have an estimate of the aggregate amount of free cash allocation set forth in this fall town meeting warrant.
Correct, right.
Ms. Ward or Ms. Ruscianato?
Yeah, I can answer that, Enzo,
Thank
if
you.
you'd like. I believe it's about 1.5, 1.6 million.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Further on the question. So these are a series of motions. Motions number 1 through 8 require a majority vote. Motions number 9 through 11 relating to funded debt require a 2/3 vote. And motions number 12 and 13, as reviewed by Mr. Ruscianato, the chair will state at the time of the presentation. So this brings us to under Article 25, motion number 1, where it's moved and seconded the town transfer $16,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 building and zoning personal services budget. Department 1413, majority vote required. Please go to your V-voter screen. All those in favor, please vote yes. All those opposed, please vote no. Hundred and 41 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Motion number 1 passes. This brings us to motion number 2. It's moved and seconded the town transfer $22,050 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 town clerk personal services budget, Department 1610. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. Hundred and 45 members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, none in the negative. Motion number 2 passes. This brings us to motion number 3. It's moved and seconded the town transfer $38,400 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 town clerk expense budget, number 1610. Motion number 3, majority vote required. Please go to your V-voter screen. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Hundred and 44 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. Motion number 3 passes. Motion number 4 is moved and seconded town transfer $156,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 Department of Public Works Personal Services budget, Department number 4100. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. Hundred and 44 members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Motion number 4 under Article 25 passes. This brings us to motion number 5 under Article 25. It's moved and seconded the town transfer $256,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 Department of Public Works expense budget, Department number 4100. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. While we're doing this, you can think about what your position is on going to all electronic voting and no voice voting at the Springtown meeting. Under motion number 5, 142 having voted the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Motion number 5 under Article 25 passes. This brings us to motion number 6. Is moved and seconded. Town vote to transfer $32,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 Department of Public Works expense budget, Department number 4100. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. 141 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 3 in the negative. Motion number 6 passes. This brings us to motion number 7. Under motion number 7, under Article 25, it's moved and seconded the town transfer $116,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 unemployment expense budget, Department number 9130. All those in favor of motion number 7, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. 145 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 3 in the negative. Motion number 7 passes. This brings us to motion number 8, as previously stated by the chair and is highlighted by Mr. Ruscianato in his presentation. Motion number 8 has been slightly revised to increase the amount of the transfer from $400,000 to $525,000. And accordingly, motion number 8 now reads as follows. It's moved and seconded the town transfer $525,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 Finance Committee Reserve Fund, Department number 9430. Majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. 'Under motion number 8, 143 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 3 in the negative. Motion number 8 passes under Article 25. This brings us now to the consideration of motion number 9. Motion number 9, 10, and 11 are motions seeking the allocation of funds from funded debt, and accordingly, a 2/3 vote will be required. Under motion number 9, it's moved and seconded that the town reduce the fiscal year 2021 funded debt principal budget, Department 7110, by $91,475, reducing the funding from the property tax levy in the amount of $86,750, and the capital stabilization fund in the amount of $4,725. 2/3 vote required under motion number 9. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. 149 members of the town meeting having voted on motion number 9 under Article 25. 100 members required for passage. 147 having voted the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Motion number 9 passes. This brings us to the consideration of motion number 10 under Article 25. It's moved and seconded the town increase the fiscal year 2021 funded debt principal budget, Department 7110, by $27,575, which increase shall be transferred from the Building Stabilization Fund. 2/3 vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. Under motion number 10, 145 members of the town meeting having cast a ballot, 97 required for passage, 142 having voted in the affirmative, and 3 in the negative, the motion passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 11, also allocation from funded debt requiring a 2/3 vote. Motion number 11 is moved and seconded. The town reduce the fiscal year 2021 funded debt interest budget department sub 120 by $324,769.14, reducing the funding from the property tax levy in the amount of $115,872.63, the building stabilization fund in the amount of $163,271, and the capital stabilization fund in the amount of $45,625.51. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen, cast your ballot on motion number 11. $150 members of the town meeting having cast a ballot, 100 required for passage, 149 having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Motion number 11 passes. This brings us to the final 2 motions under Article 25, which were presented by Mr. Rascianato, and as stated by the chair, they are as follows. Motion number 12, it's moved and seconded, the town transfer $51,000 from free cash to the fiscal year 2021 Board of Health Personal Services Budget Department number 5110. Majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen, cast your ballot for motion number 12. $146 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 3 in the negative. Motion number 12 passes. This brings us to motion number 13, the final motion under Article 25. Yay. Motion number 13, it's moved and seconded, the town transfer $112,000 from free cash to fiscal year 2021 Board of Health Expense Budget Department number 5110. Majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen, cast your ballot on motion number 13. Under 49 members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Motion number 13 passes. That concludes our consideration and debate on Article 25. Thank you very much to Mr. Rascianato and the members of the Finance Committee and Ms. Ward, the Town Comptroller, for their assistance with that. Articles 26, 27, and 28 were all passed earlier in the town meeting through the consent agenda. This brings us to Article 29, our consideration of the report and various motions brought by the Personnel Board under Article 29. The Personnel Board Chair, Peter Steinmetz, has a presentation.
That presentation is pre-recorded, so I'm happy to give it again, but it is pre-recorded.
Yes, we're going to load that up right now, I think.
Good evening. I'm Peter Steinmetz, Chair of the Personnel Board, and I'm here to present the Personnel Board's report on Article 29 of this year's Fall Town Meeting. For an overview of the article, we have 11 motions within this article. Many of them are structured the same way as the spring, in which the articles are paired, the first one being the change and the second one being the funding. The only difference is that in Articles 7, 8, and 9, the first one is the it will be the acceptance of the contract, and then it requires two motions 8 and 9 to actually fund them. So let's go through them. Motion 1, it creates two positions and it reclassifies two positions. So the positions that are deleted or at least reclassified is the executive coordinator within the town manager's office, and that has been reclassified as the committee engagement coordinator. And then we are removing a public health nurse position, and that is being moved to being a nurse manager. In addition to that, we are creating two new positions. One is called the deputy fire chief, and finally, the last one's the field marshal. The executive coordinator is a change of actual position from PT 11 to PT 13, and the public health nurse changes from a PT 14 to moved up to a management grade, and she will become a nurse manager within the public health department. As you can imagine, the public health department has been under extraordinary stress for the last 6 months, and the incumbent in this position is being given a promotion in recognition of the increased amount of work that she's been doing. The deputy fire chief position is new. It's part of the union settlement, and this will allow the fire department to hire into that position. And the field marshal is somebody with the recreation department. Their job is to travel around the town and make sure that the people who are using the town's fields are in fact signed up to use the town fields and have paid for the privilege to use the town fields and are in fact taking care of the town's fields. During the past few months, there's been a considerable amount of usage of the fields which hasn't been signed up, it hasn't been scheduled, hasn't been paid for, and it hasn't in fact been, it has been actually deleterious to the fields themselves. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on Motion 1. Motion 1 does have some financial ramifications. They're small, and in this particular case, we are allocating $6,511 to cover the costs that incur as a result of Motion 1. So that would be $4,550 into the town manager's budget and $1,961 into the Board of Health budget. The others are covered by existing budgets or won't be filled within the fiscal year. Motion 3 is a cost of living increase for the non-union personnel. And this will affect the compensation schedules 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This increase comes at mid-fiscal year. It's an addition of 1%. It comes on top of a 1.5% increase that came at the beginning of this fiscal year. And this is in recognition of the difference between what happened with all of the union contracts and what had been previously allocated for non-union personnel. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on Motion 3, and Motion 3 comes again with financial ramifications. The total financial cost of this is estimated at $36,495. The funds are distributed through departments as listed within the article in your motion book. The sources of these funds come as follows. For FY20, there's $33,889 comes from the fiscal year 21 unallocated wage budget. For money that's going to be spent within the water and sewer department, there's $451, which comes from their retained earnings, and there's $2,155 that comes from recreation's retained earnings, again for expense increases within the recreation department. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on Motion 4. In addition to, there are 3 articles total that deal with non-union compensation. This is the second one. In this one, we are creating 3 steps, 3 new steps, each at the top of a given schedule. The first one creates a step 11 in Schedule 2 in clerical. This one is 3% increase over the existing step 10, In professional technical or Schedule 3, there's an additional step 11. This is 3.5, again, increase over step 10. And then in the management schedules, Schedule 4, there's an added step 16, which is over the existing step 15 by 2.5%. This will allow people who have come to the top of the grade, top of their schedule, one more possible promotion before they have to change schedules. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 5. Motion 6 is the appropriation to deal with the financial consequences of motion 5. This has a total total estimated cost of $34,330. Again, the funds are distributed as shown in your motion book. The funding sources are as follows. $31,013 comes from the FY21 unallocated wage account. To cover the changes within the Water and Sewer Department, there's $762 that come from the Water and Sewer retained earnings. And for those changes within the recreation, those salary changes within the Recreation Department, there's $2,555 that come from the Recreational Retained Earnings Fund. Again, Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 6. Motion 7 is the contract, this is the final contract for this round. It's the contract with the Winchester Clerical Workers Union, SEIU Local 888. As I said, all the other contracts have been settled. We have passed all of the appropriations necessary for the other contracts, and this leaves us with this final contract. So the contract covers FY20, 21, the present year, and FY22. This contract comes to an end with the others on June 30th, 2022. It comes, like with all contracts, it comes with provisions for cost of living increase. In this case, retroactively for FY20, there's a 2% increase, now partially retroactive for FY21 is a 2% increase. This goes forward within the fiscal year, but it also goes back to the start of the fiscal year in July. And in the final year of the contract, fiscal year 22, there's a 2.5% increase. There's also an increase in the technology stipend. Originally, there was an existing stipend of 1% covering, and this is going back to when the clerical workers moved from things like manual or electric typewriters to computers and moved in and began taking on roles that had much more technical content. In this particular case, we have increased that from 1% to 2%, and that's retroactive within this fiscal year. It does not go back to the beginning of the contract, just to the beginning of the existing fiscal year. There's a change in the longevity formula, as you can see on the screen. There's a $100 increase for people up to 5 years, $150 up to 10, $200 up to 15, $400 for 20 and 25. Up until now, there have not been uniform rules on dealing with people who are working out of grade. Now, this happens when somebody else in the town actually goes on a long or extended vacation or extended leave of some sort, and their work has to be covered by somebody who's in fact being paid at a lower grade than the position that they are filling. And this, we now have cleared that up in this contract. And as you can see, if you're working out of grade by one step, then there's an increase of 1.5 or $1.50 per hour over your current salary. 2 grades, it's $2.50, and 3 grades, it's $3.50. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 7. As I said, motion 7 is accepting the contract that the town has come to agreement with the clerical unit. Okay, so the financial impact of motion 7, as you can see, it's a we discussed what the actual increases were, but you can see now the increases year over year. So it's a 2% increase FY20 over the base salary in FY19. So that would be the first year of the contract. There is a 6.1% increase year over year between FY20 and FY21, and a 5.7 increase between FY21 and FY22, for a compounded increase of 8.2% in the second year and 14.4% in the final year. Not sure what the 24.6% is. Motion 8, now we have to pay for the contract both in FY20 and FY21. Motion 8 pays for the contract changes retroactively into FY20. The estimated cost of the contract within FY20 is $27,101. The motion 8, so the motion 8 allocates the money to cover that, and the sources of funds are as follows. $21,460 comes from free cash. $1,872 covers the clerical covers the cost of clerical salaries within the water and sewer from retained earnings in that department, and $2,769 covers clerical costs or clerical salary increases within the recreation department from recreation retained earnings, and the Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 8. Motion 9 covers the cost of this contract within the current fiscal year. The estimated costs of that are $239, and motion 9 appropriates that amount to various budgets shown in your article handout from the following sources. $79,288 shall be raised and appropriated, which means that instead of coming from free cash, it's going to come from accounts that are available within the current year. $9,987 will cover salary increases within the Water and Sewer Department from retained earnings within that department, and $8,964 will cover salary increases within the Recreation Department from recreation retained earnings. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 9. Motion 10 is a final motion dealing with the non-union employees, and in this particular case, it deals with night differentials for dispatchers who are under the who are non-union, and the longevity pay. And again, these actually take the form of personnel policy guide changes. And as you can see, we have an increase in the night differential to 5.5% from 4.5% at the start of starting in January of 2021, and then an increased change at the start of FY22 of 6%. So that would be another 0.5% increase for night differential. And as you can see, the longevity pay increases that starting at 5, it's an increase of $100. At 10, it's an increase of $125. 15 is $150. 20, 225 years is $200. The Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 10. And there's one more piece of motion 10, and that is the sick leave buyback, which have increased in the under these changes. So previous to this, people retiring could have their sick time purchased back at $25 a day, and now starting at January 1st of 2021, they will be able to have their sick their sick leave purchased at $50 a day, down to a balance of 105 days. And starting in January 1st, 2022, that will increase to $75 a day for balances over 105. And again, motion 10 is we recommend favorable action on motion 10. Motion 11 again is the article in which we appropriate the money to pay for motion 10, and in this case, motion 10 is expected to cost $13,291 within this fiscal year, and motion 11 allocates that money across several budgets which are shown in your motion book. The sources are $4,876, which is transferred from FY21 unallocated wage account. There's $7,265, which will be raised and appropriated from current funds. And then there's $750, which goes into the Water and Sewer Department from their retained earnings, and $400, which goes into the Recreation Department from the Recreation Department's earnings. And the Personnel Board recommends favorable action on motion 11. And that concludes my remarks, and I will take questions as people wish to ask them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinmetz. The chair will entertain debate on all 11 motions as a matter of clarification. For purposes of the debate, the chair will reference the blue covered Personnel Board report to the Fall Town Meeting 2020 and incorporate the motions as stated within the report of the Personnel Board. When referring to the report, the chair will refer to the report as it has been amended by the salmon-colored revised Appendix D, which has a substituted page 28 of the original report. So the chair's reference to the report will be defined by the revised page 28 being included and substitute for the original page 28. Motion discussion on any of the motions is appropriate. And at this time, the chair would ask for a recommendation from the Select Board.
The Select Board recommends favorable action.
And from the Finance Committee, Mr. Roscinato?
We actually recommended favorable action on all except for motion 7. And I'd like to just share a couple of quick slides on motion 7.
When we get to the vote on motion number 7, Enzo, if that's agreeable to you, we'll ask you to present at that time.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
Before the debate commences, Mr. Steinmetz, one point of clarification. Your discussion under motion number 1 included the position of Field Marshal with its uncomfortably Germanic name. Since we have otherwise taken the creation of the Field Marshal, or at least the funding of that position, off the table by indefinitely postponing Article 21, I assume, though, that by simply creating the position here, that we're not committing ourselves to any funding and that there isn't any requirement or need to amend motion number 1 at this time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's true. There was no, we didn't appropriate any funds, and we didn't require anybody to hire anybody. That's similar to what happened in the Springtown meeting when we passed the fire department budget. We did create at that point essentially created at that point the deputy fire chief, and nothing happened there. So, yeah, the answer is yes. We're going to go ahead with the vote. It does not force the town to hire anybody, or in fact allow anybody to hire anybody if the funds aren't allocated.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Further on Article 29 and motions number 1 through 11, Colin Simpson. Mr. Simpson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Following up on that discussion about the field manager, there are several appropriations from Department 9010 Recreation Enterprise and several of the motions to fund. Would that be out of order to say that those should be revised?
I don't believe there's any requirement. It just sets up the appropriate protocol if at some later point that's created. Mr. Shemetz, perhaps you could clarify and respond to the town meeting member's question for us there.
None of the monies that are appropriated out of the recreation retained earnings fund go to the field manager itself. I believe that the thing we voted down previously was that appropriation. And in that directly, let me just take a quick look here. In motion 2, which is the motion that's in response to motion 1, which creates the position, in motion 2, there is no money that is going to the recreation department or from the recreation retained earnings.
Thank you very much.
Follow up?
Certainly. Follow up, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you very much. Recreation Enterprise is indeed the revolving fund, correct?
Okay, so maybe I misspoke about revolving funds. It's recreation retained earnings. The definition of revolving fund versus retained earnings is beyond me.
As a matter of clarification, the chair will note that the Recreation Enterprise Fund is not the Recreation Revolving Fund. Those are separate amounts and they are not the same fund. The debated Article 21 was going to expend those funds from the collection of the field receipts, which are collected within the revolving fund, but the meeting has indefinitely postponed consideration of that. That will not be going forward. And even though motion number 1 contemplates creation of a personnel protocol, should that position be established at some later time, it does not compel the town meeting or the town in any way to fund any amounts. So I think we are good there, and we're not committing ourselves to anything that's inconsistent with the prior action of the town meeting. Further on the consideration, Article 29, Ms. Filio, Helen Filio. Still on mute, Helen.
How about that?
Perfect.
better?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I have 2 questions. Mr. Chimers, of the clerical workers, how many are union and how many are non-union? Do you know offhand?
I thought, I would have to say, I thought that all of the clerical unions, all of the clerical workers were union. However, I don't know that to be the case, and my guess would be that any that work at the library aren't, but it's possible that somebody else has a better answer.
Okay. And then if they're a non-union worker and they have the buyback policy, are they eligible to utilize that policy as well? A non-union worker?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
yeah, they are.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Filio. This brings us to the consideration of Article 29. Article 29, making reference to the report of the Personnel Board for the Fall Town Meeting dated November 5th, 2020. This brings us to the consideration of motion number 1. These are all majority votes under motion number 1. It's moved and seconded the town's compensation plan be amended effective January 1, 2021, as recommended by the town manager and the Personnel Board as set forth in Appendix A, and the motion otherwise reads as set forth in the Personnel Board report on pages 2 and 3. All those in favor, please vote aye. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. Motion number 1 under Article 29. (136) members of town meeting having voted the affirmative, 2 in the negative, the motion passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 2, which appears on page 3 of the Personnel Board report. It's moved to second, the town transfer the sum of $6,511 from the fiscal year 21 unallocated wage account 03125 541. And the motion reads as otherwise set forth on page 3 of the Personnel Board Report under motion number 2, majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen and cast your ballot. Under motion number 2 on Article 29, 141 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. Motion number 2 passes. This brings us to motion number 3. Under motion number 3 on page 3 of the Personnel Board Report. It's moved and seconded that schedules 2, CS Clerical, 3, Professional Technical, 4, Management, 5, Miscellaneous, and 6, Recreation of the town's compensation plan be amended, and the motion otherwise reads as set forth with particularity on page 3 of the Personnel Board Report. Majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen, cast your ballot. Hundred 139 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 2 in the negative. Motion number 3 passes. This brings us to consideration motion number 4. So we seconded the town appropriate the sum of $36,495 to the following fiscal year 21 municipal personnel services budgets. The motion otherwise reads as set forth with particularity on page 3 and 4 of the Personnel Board Report. Majority vote required under motion number 4, Article 29. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Under motion number 4, 138 members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Motion number 4 passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 5. It's been seconded. Schedules 2, CS Clerical, 3, Professional Technical, 4, Management. The town's compensation plan be amended. The motion otherwise reads as set forth with particularity of page 4 of the Personnel Board Report. Majority vote required. All those in favor of motion number 5, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen and cast your ballot. Under motion number 5, 133 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Motion number 4 passes. Motion number 5 passes. I'm sorry. Apologize for the misstatement. This brings us to consideration of motion number 6. Motion number 6, which appears on pages 4 and 5 of the Personnel Board Report. Under motion number 6, is moved and seconded. Town appropriate sum of $34,330 to the following fiscal year 21 municipal personnel services budget. The motion otherwise reads as stated with particularity on pages 4 and 5 of the Personnel Board Report. Motion number 6 requires a majority vote at the town meeting. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen and cast your ballot. Under motion number 6, 140 members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, 1 the negative. Motion number 6 passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 7. Motion number 7 seeks revisions in the town's compensation plan in accordance with Appendix D. The chair notes that Appendix D has been revised with a replaced page 28 on the salmon colored sheet distributed to the members of the town meeting. This is the SEIU Local 888 Winchester Clerical Union Clerical Workers Compensation Schedules for fiscal year 20, 21, and 22. The Finance Committee takes a contrary position on motion number 7. With respect to the position of the Finance Committee on motion number 7, its chair, Mr. Roscinato. Mr. Roscinato.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to share a couple of quick slides on this topic. So FinCom voted unfavorable action on motion 7. Overall, as I said before, we were very supportive of the other articles, but motion 7 had 2 key areas that forced us to vote in unfavorable action. The first was around the size of the increases associated. It had both increases for COLA as well as increased steps at the end of the schedule. And this really impacts the total impact on the budget, as we'll see in just a bit. The second was really around this tech stipend item. The tech stipend gives a lump sum payment to all union employees of 1%, and now it's changing to 2% with this. And for having to learn new technology in their roles, there's no tech stipend in any other union contract for the town, and there's no tech stipend in any other clerical union contract in comparable towns. So, and generally, the third point there being for most roles, learning new skills and technologies is a benefit, not something you get paid extra to do. So I think that was really a big part of why we voted on favorable action. But the size of the increase, the combination of the COLA and the steps really affects the town budget. I know math and a late night is probably a bad combination, but I think it's important to understand this overall impact. So if you take just one example, right, and I just pick one at S27, someone who's at level 8 on schedule 1, if you're following along at home, and their current salary is $57,000, you get an increase in FY19 from the 2%, and then you have a step up to go up to level 9. So that'll increase the salary in addition to that, and then you have the tech stipend on top of that. So the total year increase was 7%. And then if you then keep going for 2 more years, in FY21, you take that current salary again, you're increasing it by the COLA, then you also get another step up for this new level that was created, and then you have the tech stipend, you've gone up another 5.1%. Same thing in FY22 for 5.6%. So overall, in those 3 years, you've gone up 18.7%. I think Peter and his numbers had 14 and 24. So it all depends on what level you pick and where you're at in the things. It varies. But overall, it's a really big increase, especially when you consider CPI is going to get raised 7% over that same period. And our town budget, even more importantly, our town budget, which goes up on average 3% a year, which would add up to, I think, 9.2%. So, really big impacts when you're looking at the overall kind of macro level. Thank you.
This brings us to debate on motion number 7 under Article 29. The chair, to the extent the Personnel Board or the Select Board wish to address motion number 7 with particularity, they're welcome to do so. Further on the question, town meeting member Ann Sarah. Ms. Sarah.
Mr. Moderator, how did the Finance Committee vote no for motion 7, but yes for motion 8, which I thought was a motion to appropriate funds for motion 7?
The town meeting member's question about the division between motions 7 and 8 and whether not endorsing 7, but endorsing 8 were inconsistent. In response to that question, Mr. Roscinato.
So yes, we understand that 7, 8, and 9 are all affiliated. We voted unfavorable action on 7. We thought we would, this is where our feedback would be given. But we, at the same time, we recognize that if the town decides to pass on motion 7, they need the funding for 8 and 9. So we voted favorable action on those, even though obviously they're all affiliated.
Thank you very much. Further on the question under motion number 7 on Article 29. Seeing no request for further debate, this brings us to a vote on motion number 7. Motion number 7, it's moved and seconded that Schedule 1 of the town's compensation plan be amended, revised, and modified in accordance with the recommendation of the town manager and the personnel board as set forth in Appendix D, SEIU Local 888. And the motion otherwise reads as set forth on page 5 of the personnel board report, including the revised Appendix D separately distributed. Motion number 7 is majority vote. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen, cast your ballot. Motion number 7, 69 members of the town meeting having voted in the affirmative, 68 in the negative. Motion number 7 passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 8. Under motion number 8, which appears on page 9 of the personnel board report, it's moved and seconded. The town appropriate the sum of $27,101 fiscal year 20 municipal personal services budget listed below. And the motion otherwise reads as set forth with particularity on page 9 of the personnel board report. Motion number 8 is majority ballot. All those in favor of motion number 8, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Motion number 8, 116 having voted the affirmative, 19 negative. Motion number 8 passes. Mr. Conti raises a point of order. Mr. Conti, what is your point of order?
Actually, there was no option. I would like to move reconsideration on Article 7.
Reconsideration on Article 7. Is there a second on that motion? Motion's been seconded by Ms. Allison. The motion for reconsideration will become the last order of business at this town meeting. This brings us to consideration of motion number 9. Motion number 9, which appears on page 10 of the personnel board report. It's moved and seconded. The town appropriates the sum of $98,239 to the various fiscal year 21 municipal personal services budgets listed below. And the motion otherwise reads as stated with particularity on page 10 of the personnel board report. Majority vote required. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your review voter screen, cast your ballot. Yeah, motion 9. Article 29. November 12th, 9:33 p.m. It's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday the 13th. I know. Dun, 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 dun. We have a technical small V voter issue, which is remarkable given how seamless the whole system has run, both in our prior use of it in the spring and currently. I'm sure we'll address that shortly. We are working to fix that issue on the platform. So this is 9. We're probably going to revote 9, and then we'll vote 10 and 11. There are no motions under Article 30. So that will bring us to the consideration of Mr. Conti's motion to reconsider motion number 7. The motion for reconsideration requires a 2/3 vote. And we will entertain that. It's right after our consideration of motion 11. Debate on the motion of reconsideration will of course be appropriate. So if we could ask your indulgence to revote on 9, we appreciate your courtesy in that regard. So motion number 9 is moved and seconded. The town appropriate the sum of $98,239 to the various fiscal year 21 municipal personal services budgets listed below. And the motion otherwise reads as stated with particularity on page 10 of the personnel report under Article 29. All those in favor, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your voter screen and cast your ballot. (122) members of the town meeting having voted the affirmative, 18 in the negative. Motion number 9 under Article 29 passes. This brings us to consideration of motion number 10 under Article 29. Under motion number 10, it's been seconded the town of Winchester Personnel Policy Guide be accepted and approved as follows. And the motion otherwise reads as set forth on pages 10 and 11 of the Personnel Board report. Majority vote required. All those in favor of motion number 10 under Article 29, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your voter screen and cast your ballot. Under motion number 10, 129 members of the town meeting having voted affirmative, 10 in the negative. Motion number 10 passes. This brings us to motion number 11 and the final motion under Article 29. It's moved and seconded. The town appropriate the sum of $13,291 to the various fiscal year 21 municipal personal services budgets as listed below. And the motion otherwise reads as set forth with particularity on pages 11 and 12 of the Personnel Board report under Article 29. Majority vote required. All those in favor of motion number 11, please vote yes. Any opposed, please vote no. Please go to your voter screen, cast your ballot. Someone's got their mic unmuted and they're sending off Microsoft messages in a way that's chirping in everyone's ear. Stop that. Under motion number 11, 136 having voted the affirmative, 4 in the negative. Motion number 11 passes. Under Article 30, there are no motions currently before the meeting under Article 30, and accordingly, this brings us to the motion for reconsideration. The motion for reconsideration was made under Article 29, motion number 7. Motion originally was passed by the town meeting of a vote of 69 to 68. The motion for reconsideration brought in accordance with the bylaws that govern the conduct of the town meeting requires a 2/3 vote of the town meeting If the motion for reconsideration is successful, we will return to a vote and consideration of motion number 7. If it is not successful, the vote on motion number 7 to approve it will stand, and that will otherwise conclude our business this evening. The motion for reconsideration through its proponent, Mr. Conti. Mr. Conti.
Mr. Moderator, I know this is probably a futile gesture on my part, but I want to remind town meeting members why we have a finance committee. The chairman of the finance committee made a very compelling argument about why this motion should not have passed. And it would behoove us to pay attention to the expertise that the finance committee brings to this subject. This is really an unprecedented change in our personnel policy to be providing such a substantial increase in these salary accounts for technical upgrades, which are not found anywhere else in any of our employment contracts. So I would hope that the town meeting would think carefully on this and pay attention to what our finance committee expertise has presented us with, and vote favorably on reconsideration. That's
Thank you very
all I
much,
have to
Mr.
say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conti. On the motion for reconsideration, if the proponents of 7 or the select board wish to be heard, the chair would welcome any input they care to make.
This is Peter, chairman of the Personnel Board. I actually believe it's a mischaracterization to say that changes in technical skill are not paid for. In fact, we passed a number of them in the spring for management personnel. In the unionized contracts, there are many, I wouldn't say hundreds, but I think in each one of the contracts, there are many, many, many of them, including maintaining your driver's license be able to drive a truck, maintaining one of the big problems we have is in the water department is we're forced to increase the amount we pay people to maintain their licenses, and that requires studying and taking tests and passing licensure in a number of things in operating the water and sewer system. So to say that this is a distinct advantage somewhere in the town that nobody else gets, I think is completely incorrect.
Thank you, Mr. Steinmetz. Further on the question, Mr. Betancourt, do you wish to be heard?
Nothing further on this one, Mr. Moderator. I think, we probably didn't delve into this in much detail as the Finance Committee did. And so I know that they had spent quite a bit of time on this particular article. So, we recommended favorable action from the beginning. So that's what I have for a vote from the Select Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Betancourt. Further on the question, Samantha Allison, Ms. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to echo Mr. Conti's remarks. As a former Finance Committee member and being heavily involved in the override effort, I guess a year or two ago now, it seems like longer, we have very little incremental funding available to us. We anticipated that the override would last maybe 2 to 3 years. And that assumed that we would have, sort of 2 or 3% increases in our costs, not 18%. So I encourage town meeting members really to reconsider the dollar amount of the increase that we're looking at over only a 3-year contract, on top of a contract that was, also renegotiated very late in the process fairly recently as well. So it's an awful big increase in a short period of time. Thank you.
Further on the question, Ms. Janice Jens from Precinct 4. Ms. Jens.
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to voice my agreement with the Finance Committee. I think certainly the technical stipend, I think it's just part of working in an office environment in the 21st century. We're all sort of updating our skills all the time. So I think that would really just comes with part of being a professional in this day and age. I also want to remind everyone that we're all still suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic repercussions. And there are many townspeople who are suffering, and this will add a burden. It seems to have this kind of contract and this kind of numbers that we're seeing impact the budget to be exorbitant. Thank you.
Further on the question on the motion for reconsideration, Article 7, Jeffrey Dean. Mr. Dean from precinct number 2. Mr. Dean.
Thank you, town meeting. Jeff Dean, precinct number 2. I think we spent a lot of money in this town meeting without the normal rigorous debate that we would have if we were live and in person. And I would just remind everyone that our budget is truly a zero-sum game. And the presumption that we're going to have the ability to have another override in the short term is increasingly unlikely based on where the electorate is. So every dollar we spend right now is one less teacher, one less firefighter, one less deep cleaning of our schools. And I think we need to be very thoughtful with the funds that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Further on the motion for reconsideration of motion number 7 on Article 29, Ms. Kalabi.
Is that me, Priscilla Kalabi?
Yes, it is you.
Precinct 1, thank you. I have a couple of questions. What kind of work is covered by this? And we voted a fairly substantial increase to police. Is this a way of bringing these jobs up to a salary commensurate with what such workers would get in other towns? Could we have a little background information on that, please?
In response to the town meeting member's question about whether or not this particular contract tracks that afforded to other municipal unions and whether or not the wages as established by this contract within the knowledge of the personnel board are consistent with those like positions in other communities, Mr. Shimetz.
I'm going to defer to Michelle, the head of the HR for the specifics on that. I don't have that in front of me. I believe she's on. Michelle Vibert.
So Michelle Vibert, the HR director, or actually perhaps the town manager, Ms. Wong, could address that for us.
Sure.
Ms. Vibert, or I hear is present. Are you present, Ms. Vibert?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm actually going to defer to the town manager, Lisa Wong.
Thank you, Ms. Wong. The town manager, Lisa Wong.
Hi, everyone. So a couple of remarks regarding the clerical union negotiations. So in looking at it in totality, we did do a similar comp study with various other communities. The clerical union was a bit more complicated because each position within that union is different from each other. So it wasn't the same as looking at, police level, patrol, sergeant, lieutenant, etc. So we did look at it case by case. In terms of the COLAs, we thought that those were similar, if not minimal, to other unions. The other unions did get step increases. In this case, the clerical union had not received a change in their step schedule, I believe, since the early 80s. So it felt necessary to look at some sort of step structure. And then in terms of the tech stipend, my understanding is that town meeting adopted the 1% tech stipend in a past meeting or past contract. There was no real language or understanding attributed to that 1% tech stipend. So from an operational standpoint, there didn't seem to be necessarily a large change in what the clerical union was doing. I guess it was to acknowledge that new technology had existed over the last decades. So our attempt to add definitive language to that tech stipend did come at a negotiated expense of increasing it from 1% to 2%. The language that we put into the contract was to try to encompass all technology in totality, in perpetuity, unlike the previous 1% that was sort of non-attributed to anything in a particular.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wong. The chair reminds the meeting that the meeting in this context is an appropriating authority, not a negotiating authority. And accordingly, for us, the issue is whether to appropriate these amounts or not. They have been affirmatively appropriated under motion number 7. We are now debating a motion to reconsider that vote. And accordingly, we conclude our debate. I think our final speaker asking for recognition is Mr. Betancourt from the Select Board. Mr. Betancourt.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. Through you to Ms. Calabi. Just to put a finer point on this, all of our bargaining units, they really affect each other as we're bargaining over a period of time. So large increases over a period of time in one bargaining unit, puts us in a different position with other bargaining units. So as we're looking, over a longer period of time and trying to manage, limited funds, as mentioned by Ms. Allison and Mr. Dean, it's something that town meeting should be considering as we're approving all of our contracts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Betancourt. This brings us to our final deliberation or motion of the evening, which is Mr. Conti's motion that we reconsider the previous action of the meeting to vote affirmatively under motion number 7 under Article 29. This requires a 2/3 vote. Those wishing to reconsider Article 7 and return to debate on Article 7, please vote yes. Those who do not wish to reconsider Article 7 and wish to allow the prior action to stand, please vote no. In favor of reconsideration, please vote yes. Opposed to reconsideration, please vote no. Please go to your V-voter screen and cast your ballot. $135 members of the town meeting having cast a ballot on the motion for reconsideration, 90 members required for passage, 86 having voted in the affirmative, 49 in the negative. The motion for reconsideration fails. We have no further action before the town meeting. The chair earlier in the meeting referred to the term field marshal as being uncomfortably Germanic and has been asked to apologize for his remark. The chair does so. This brings us to a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Oops. I've done so. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please note. Thank you very much. Thank you much to Option Technology, Mary Ellen Lannon, Sam Allison, and Mr. Gothier, and our great friends at WinCam, Mr. Krieger, who's faithfully stood by us as town council this evening. We appreciate everyone's hard work and glad we were able to conclude this tonight.
Mr. Moderator, do we get to acknowledge your final presence here with us at town meeting?
No.
Many thanks, Mr. Moderator. It would not be the same without you.
Good job, everybody.
All right. I guess that was our wrap up for our final session of Springtown meeting here. I'm Alan Iden here at the WinCam Studios, and what you have just seen is the wrap up for Winchester's third and final session for fall 2021 town meeting, conducted via Zoom and V-Voter, if you've been watching it. So we started off
with a what seems to be a new tradition of poetry from our moderator, a very long poem with possibly some political ramifications, which I won't go into, but it's always a nice way to introduce our meeting. And it's the only one he's done in this 3-session town meeting. So we came back and went into Article 20. Article 20 was a proposal to appropriate or to fund $6,050,000 for improvements to the North Reservoir Dam via bonding. We heard that dam is in poor condition. We had some problems with if you were watching, we had some problems with our Zoom. We got knocked off Zoom. So we were able to carry the audio of that, but not the video, so we apologize for that. But this dam is in poor condition, and it needs these repairs to keep using the North Reservoir and the Middlesex Fells. As you may know, Winchester has 3 reservoirs up there, and about half the town uses water from there. The other half uses it, we purchase it from the MWRA. We heard that seepage is a problem in this dam. A filter must be installed and a lot of material must be removed and disposed of. And then it has to be rebuilt to modern standards, which means more material being put in than was taken out. We heard it was a once-in-a-lifetime repair, unfortunately coming during our lifetimes. And this was required by the Office of Dam Safety. Quite frankly, I didn't even realize we had that, but apparently there is an Office of Dam Safety. That passed, $6 million appropriation by a vote of 148 to 2. Article 21 was on the consent agenda, and if you were following this, consent agenda had about 10 or 11 articles that were considered less than controversial, so they were all passed on one vote at the beginning of town meeting last Thursday. However, there can be a motion to take something off a consent agenda and have it reconsidered. This one involved the revolving funds for the grass and synthetic fields. There were 2 funds to maintain those fields, separate funds. These involve collecting fees for the use of the fields, and those fees go back into the maintenance of those fields, both, again, 2 separate funds for the grass fields and for the synthetic fields. But this involved a hiring of what the position was called a field marshal, a part-time position. And this would be an employee who would monitor the use of the fields, apparently substantial use, we heard, by unauthorized groups that cause an awful lot of extra wear and tear on the field and don't pay the appropriate fees that would go into these funds. So this marshal would look to capture those funds and make sure rules of the field are followed and enforced. We heard that the annual cost of this position would be $5,000 to $7,000, and there's a hope that having somebody monitoring these fields would reduce the excess wear and tear on the fields. This also said that this article also said full-time employees would not be paid from the revolving fund, only part-time or temporary employees. We got Chris Nixon, town meeting member Chris Nixon, moved to indefinitely postponed it. He said funding for this should come back in the spring town budget for consideration in the overall budget. That motion to indefinitely postpone was passed by a vote of 75 to 68. So there was no action on Article 21. Next few articles were on the consent agenda, so we moved to Article 25. These were 13 motions for moving money from free cash into different accounts. Most of these seem to be related to the COVID pandemic. Some of the, for instance, expenses for the town clerk's office involved in the expenses of converting these town meetings to virtual. Also, considerably additional expenses for the Board of Health, as you might expect. Most of these expenses were covered in the CARES Act in 2020, but will not be covered during the next half of the fiscal year, which is January through June. The total of all these motions, there were 13 of them, was $1.324 million, although $525,000 of that, almost half of it, was to move money into the Finance Committee's reserve fund. And it was explained by the chairman of the Finance Committee that that fund is used for unexpected expenses that may come up between now and the next town meeting, the spring town meeting. So all 13 articles passed, none of them failed. Article 29, the one we just saw, was the report of the annual report of the Personnel Board, reflecting changes and reclassifications of town employees and the dollar amounts needed to fund them. Among one of the new positions was the position of Deputy Fire Chief, and the position of Field Marshal was created, although, as you just heard, it has not been funded. So that would be left up to a spring town meeting. There was about a 1% increase for non-union personnel. But the Finance Committee opposed one of the motions, motion number 7, for some wage increases they said could reach 18% over 2 years. And also, they also objected to a lump sum stipend for technical expertise or technical education. All of these motions passed, but town meeting member Anthony Conti moved to reconsider Article 7. He said that the town meeting should consider the advice of the Finance Committee, the expertise of the Finance Committee. Several other town meeting members also chimed in and thought that these cumulative increases were excessive. The motion to reconsider, however, failed by a vote of 86 to 49. And that wrapped up the third session of Winchester's Fall 2021 town meeting. Again, held virtually here at the WinCam studios. We saw some pretty interesting technical advances here, something called V-Voter, where all the town meeting members can cast their votes. And also, if you saw one of our earlier sessions, there is a motion coming towards spring town meeting to make these part of our bylaws, the ability to hold these virtual town meetings. So that should be interesting, something to watch out for. In any case, we thank you for having watched here. Hope that our summaries at the end of these town meetings are useful to you and save you from having to watch what was 2.5 hours of what we hoped was going to be a fairly short town meeting. But once again, we thank you for watching, and all of us here at WinCam hope that you stay safe and stay well. Have a great night. I'm Alan Iden.